So welcome to this Weatherford College Interdisciplinary Conference, day 2, and it's session 5, right?
It is.
Session. I'm going to introduce our Dr. Stamatis today. So she is associate professor here, and she teaches A&P. She teaches non-major biology, not teaching this semester, right?
Online.
Online, yeah. So she has non-major biology, and she is again environmentalist, and she teaches environmental biology here for the non-majors. So she went to Austin College, and she did her bachelor's in biology, Bachelor's of Arts, and then she went to actually med school at Texas Tech, and then she realized actually she is not into medical school, and she doesn't want to practice the medicine. And then she went to UT El Paso, and she did her master's in biology, and then to the UNT actually where I went. Okay, and she did her Ph.D. in environmental biology. So besides her love of teaching here, actually she is passionate to the environmental conservation, kind of, so environmental, sustainable environment. So that's why she actually also organizes the Earth Day, which is coming this spring, okay, every year. And also she is working with the Parker County office to for the sustainable environmental approaches, and this is what she's going to be talking today. And she's also actually a sponsor of Science Club here, and we also do, I'm with her, so we two are Science Club sponsors, and we meet every first Friday of the month. Actually, today the first Friday of the month, so since we have this Science Club going on here, this conference going on here, all our students will be around here. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Stamatis.
Well, thank you guys for being here on a Friday morning. I appreciate it very much, and welcome to Weatherford College. I know a lot of you, we kind of chatted a little while ago, are from Parker County or surrounding counties. So don't feel like you're being excluded just because this talks about environmental sustainability in Parker County, because a lot of these resources that we'll talk about are available anywhere we go. So when we were planning for the interdisciplinary conference, and they said you can select any topic that you would like to talk about. Well, I'm passionate about the medical field, even though I didn't want to practice in that. I really, enjoy learning about medicine and teaching that to my students. I joke with my A&P students that they get the med school dropout. But I'm especially passionate about the environmental sciences because I feel like it's something that we can all do, and in a way, it's kind of our responsibility, ultimately, to look back to our resources that we have and make sure we use them in a sustainable manner. Because it's kind of like with your bank account. If you overspend, if you spend more than what you have coming into your checking account, how long is that going to last for you? Not very long, right? So that would be unsustainable spending. It's kind of the same thing when we talk about our environment and our various resources that we have everywhere, not just in Parker County. And also by talking about our resources that we have, it makes us appreciate our surroundings. It makes us appreciate and want to give back. And I think that that's also something that we somewhat have a responsibility to do as well. You guys come on in, welcome. So the first thing is, why should we strive for sustainability? Why is this something that we should make as one of our either personal goals or city or county or a national goal? I believe that it's important for us to achieve this, or at least to make that a goal, because it's reflective of what happens in nature. Nature has been able to sustain itself with these renewability cycles, with nutrient cycling, like the water cycle. You're all familiar with the hydrologic or water cycle. And also with solar energy, and then plants grow from that, and then animals eat that, and then animals die, and then plants use those materials over and over again. Nature has been doing that for millions of years, if not billions of years also. So we can apply some of those same lessons that we see in nature, and then even take some of the small examples from nature and apply it to what we are doing. So one of the things that we can use as a little bit of a lesson, so we can see maybe what not to do and how to change our lifestyle. Some of you may be familiar with this image with these large statues. Anyone recognize where those statues are from?
Easter Island?
From Easter Island, very good. So Easter Island is a very remote island off the coast of South America on the Chilean side. And for many years, archaeologists were fascinated by these statues. And they thought, you know, how in the world did these huge statues make their way to the coastline? Obviously, they didn't get up and walk, but there weren't many native peoples that were left. And so they didn't have much of an archaeological history. But through archaeological exploration, they found the quarry. It was about 6 miles away. So how did they move these huge statues 6 miles to the coastline? And when you look at the island, it seems kind of relatively desert-like. There aren't very many trees at all. It's just some low-growing vegetation, and come on in, and maybe some shrubs.
Sorry.
But what they found was, with this archaeological evidence, the island used to be covered with a forested area. It was very diverse in its tree species, bird species, all kinds of things. And there used to be several thousand native people, native Polynesians, that lived on this island and inhabited it. But with that abundance of resources, they thought, oh, we can just cut down these trees. They used the logs to roll the statues. That's how they got them from the quarry to the coastline. But very quickly, they over-depleted those resources. They had a growing population, and then their resources started to decline. And actually, that happened so rapidly that they had a massive die-off in their population. Disease and famine spread throughout the population. And in the late 1800s, there were less than 100 of the native people that were left. There still are some people today that consider themselves to be the descendants of these native Polynesian people, the Rapa Nui that lived on Easter Island. But I think we should look to this as an example. That's just one small island, but our Earth is like an island as well, because we have a finite number of resources, and how many backup planets do we have if we use up the resources that are here? Like, we've been looking really, really long and hard, right, with space exploration, but just off the top of your head, what's that number of how many extra planets we have? It's 0. It's an easy number to remember. We don't have much backup. So that's why I think that it's our social and economic and personal responsibility to take care of these resources that we have left. So we don't one day look back and say, uh-oh, we should have really followed that example of Easter Island. So one of the big concepts that I like to instill with a lot of my students, and personally, is I like to look at my ecological footprint. Now, this is just a conceptual idea. It's not literally your footprint, but it's the concept of the biologically available resources, the land, the water, plants and animals, that would take to sustain your lifestyle. So based upon how you live, like what kind of diet you have, where you shop, what type of house you live in, how much you travel, how many resources do you use up? So it's typically measured in units called hectares. And most of us usually think in terms of acres. Like, my brain doesn't wrap really well around how many hectares are in an acre. But it's about 2.5 acres in 1 hectare. And we're going to look at some units coming up in just a little bit. But what my brain does wrap around really easily is earths. We can measure that ecological footprint in how many earths does it take to sustain your lifestyle. And ideally, the number would just be 1, because that's all we have, right? We have this 1 earth. But what we'll find, and I want to show you a little example, there's actually a website, and there's several of these websites, that you can go to calculate your own ecological footprint. And some of my students, a couple of you are here in this class, you've done this before. You went to this online calculator and calculated yours, and then your goal by the end of the semester is to see if even just being conscious of some of the choices, maybe not necessarily that you thought about them and actively made them, but just understanding them a little bit more, maybe decreased your ecological footprint. Because the writing on the wall is that our world average ecological footprint, this is all 7.5 billion of us averaged together, it's almost 3 hectares of land per person. Now, that's already overshooting, that whole 1 acre that we have for each person to use. But if you look at, our ecological footprint for the United States, just all of us averaged together, this is not necessarily one of those instances where we shout, yay, U.S. is #1, right? Because this is, one of those things where, we don't want to necessarily shame ourselves, right? We're not into that. but we have a tremendously large ecological footprint. Just very, very recently, however, we were surpassed by Canada. So yay, we're just down to number 2. But number 2 sounds equally bad, right? We don't want to be number 2. So if you look at these other planets, just really quickly, glancing at Haiti, Rwanda, India, they have a very small ecological footprint. Why do you think that is? What do you think the biggest factors are that make your footprint bigger versus really small?
They're third world countries.
Yeah, they're still developing countries. Is it that Haitians are that much more ecologically aware and eco-friendly and buying green products? What is it? They don't have the resources, right? They simply don't have the resources to buy it. In these other countries, you'll notice a really strong correlation. The countries with a bigger ecological footprint, they're much more affluent. And so when we're more affluent, I think about it, I call it the lottery effect. If you were to win the lottery, if most of us were to win the lottery, what would we go out and do? You buy more stuff, right? You're gonna buy more, you're gonna buy another house, you're gonna buy another car, nicer clothes. Most of us, and some of us may say, oh, we're gonna invest that money. But the majority of us would still buy more stuff. So when we have more resources, we consume more resources. So that does take its toll. Just really quickly, I want to show you what this website looks like, so you can take some time. I'm not going to walk you through the whole thing, but there's several free online ecological footprint calculators. This particular one, and I've searched through most of them, this one's through an organization, a nonprofit called Footprint Network. And if you go up to the top right, it's just footprintnetwork.org, and you can click donate if you wanted to, like I accidentally almost did, but click on calculate your footprint, and it will ask you to enter your email address. But I have done this time and time again, and I still have not gotten any spam from it. Knock on wood, I'm going to jinx you guys. But it's going to take you through a series of steps to analyze what your lifestyle is like. And be honest with yourself, because this isn't accountable to anyone else. But take 5 minutes to go through this calculator and ask or answer questions about your diet, your travel, the kind of vehicle that you drive, your house, all of those things, your buying decisions, how much trash you produce. And there's a quick way to go through this where you can just do it in a few minutes, or if you click on this little portion right here, you can adjust it a little bit more. The more you adjust it to fit your actual lifestyle, the more reflective it's going to be. And at the end of all of this, you just go through and you'll scroll through slide to slide on, it'll ask you about your foods, if they're mostly prepackaged or locally grown. And you may, as you're going through, you're like, great, hadn't thought about that one. But as you go through, you'll start to see that it will accumulate all those resources that you use. And by the end of it, and I kind of, I was happy to be able to use this talk today as a platform to talk about the things that I'm passionate about and can sometimes get a little preachy about. But my my footprint calculated on this website, when I first started doing this maybe 10 years ago, it was about 3.8 Earths. That was astonishing. That was the shock and awe moment where I was like, really? 3.5 Earths? or 3.8 Earths? And I thought of myself as being super, eco-friendly. I drove a Prius, and I used cloth diapers with all of my kiddos, and compost the heck out of everything. But it was still clearly an unsustainable ecological footprint. And even to this day, I just did this a month and a half ago with my environmental science students, and it was down to 2.5 Earths. And so I'm like, yay, I reduced it by 1 whole Earth. I saved an Earth with whatever choices I have been making throughout this past 10 years or so. But it's still at a relatively unsustainable level compared to what it could be. So I just want you to be a little bit more conscious of that. So that's why I'd like you, just in your spare time, not that it's a homework assignment that's accountable to me, but to go back and calculate your ecological footprint. But then let's speak to maybe some of the choices that you could make that could potentially decrease your footprint. Some of them are big picture things, like what if I want to install solar panels? But other things, because that's usually cost prohibitive for a lot of people, especially since a lot of us are students, what are some small things that you could do? So I'm going to kind of go through a whole scale of things. So the first thing is your energy resources. Energy resources include a whole host of things. Like from whenever we flip on the lights in this room, where did that electricity come from? we ask a kindergarten or first grader and they say, well, it came from, the magic energy in this room. It came from the light switch. But ultimately, most of that energy, in North Texas, most of our electricity, 70% of it, 70 to close to 80%, comes from the burning of fossil fuels, the burning of coal, usually. So that's, again, long story short, an unsustainable process because we know we will run out of that. Not only is it a dirty fuel source, but we know that there's not going to be enough of that left to sustain us for a very long time. So that's why we're moving towards more renewable sources. So you can select your utility provider sometimes. Most of us that live in Parker County, you probably don't have a choice. If you live in the city limits, you have zero choice because it's Weatherford Electric. And most of us who live outside of the city limits, also no choice because you're probably part of Tri-County Cooperative. And that varies throughout the state of Texas, and it varies from state to state. The reason for that is that in 2002, they had this opt-in program where they had this deregulation process where they said, you know what, we're going to allow consumers to have a choice so they can choose their electricity provider. Because some electricity providers will, and they're not really the ones making the electricity, they're just paying another company. They're kind of like the middleman, but they may choose to buy more power from hydroelectric plants or nuclear facilities or wind generation. We don't have that choice. However, it does, interestingly enough, it does bring our price down. I just looked up these numbers yesterday, and for Tri-County Co-op right now, it's just a little above 8 cents per kilowatt hour. And it's close to, for Weatherford Electric, it's close to 10.8 cents. That's relatively cheap, and that's probably because because they can centrally kind of take care of that. They've taken away that middleman of having the other companies to choose from. If you're able to select your company, sometimes there's Green Mountain Energy, companies like that, where they will tell you what's the breakdown of where that electricity comes by. So that could be a small step if you're allowed to have that choice. Most of the time, however, the majority of us in this room probably don't have that choice. So what are some other things you can think about? Solar panels and wind turbines, geothermal heat pumps. That's something where they have tubes that go down into the ground, and basically you send cold water down through those tubes, and then the earth gets hotter and hotter as it gets deeper and deeper, so it warms up that water. Then that warm water is pumped back up into your house, and it warms up your house. The warm water warms up the air, so it can be used to warm your home, and it can actually be used to reverse directions to cool your home. But many of those things are cost prohibitive, obviously. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars to be able to install some of those. But if you were to consider those, if you were thinking about installing one of those various things, most people tend to, a few people in Texas, quite a few thousand, have geothermal heat pumps. But most people would tend to maybe lean towards solar or wind. And which one of those is more efficient? Well, if you look, we've all driven around the state of Texas a little bit. Which one do you think the state of Texas and other utility providers, which one are they banking on? Which one do you see more of when you drive around this great state? They're really big. Wind turbines. So yes, wind turbines are far more efficient than solar panels. One of those big wind turbines can produce as much electricity as 48,000 solar panels. Super efficient. But how many of us can have one of those massive wind turbines in our backyard? We clearly can't. And they also come with a lot of moving parts. And maybe you've noticed if you've driven around that some of those are starting to rust out, then catch on fire, get struck by lightning. They come with a lot more maintenance issues. So from a residential standpoint, for individual homeowners, solar is by far the more efficient choice because it comes with fewer moving parts and the prices are much more dramatically coming down. The technology gets better every year, so the price comes down on that. And with each of those, with any of them that you purchase, each of the wind, solar, or geothermal, there's a 30% federal tax credit. That means that you still pay the upfront cost for buying those panels and for the installation, but after that, you just, on your taxes, report to the federal government that this is how much I spent, you include your invoice, and then you get a 30% tax credit. So it's kind of like a mail-in rebate in a way. They don't send you a check, but it's 30% off from that bill. So that's, if you went and shopped a sale and you were like, this was 30% off, that's a pretty big cost savings. But that is going to go away because the federal government realizes that there's more and more people doing this, we're gonna start losing money. And so they're phasing it out. Right now, it's been renewed year after year. But at the end of 2019, they are gonna decrease it by 4%, so it'll only be 26% off. And then it's going to completely expire, supposedly at the end of 2021. So that may get renewed, but the writing on the wall is that it will eventually go away. So if you are leaning towards that, then maybe do that sooner rather than later. So we do have some local solar installers. This happens to be my house. I did a couple of very small installations. What I did was after I finished paying off my student loans and that year of med school, finished paying that off, I took that same money and I just put it in a savings account. And I saved up for many years and then just put up 10 solar panels. And then I waited a couple more years and then put up 12 more. And actually those 12 solar panels were about a third less than what I paid for the 10 solar panels the first time around because the price had gone down so much more. So slowly but surely, I just plan to add to it over time. It doesn't have to be a big, massive endeavor. Just do what you can. Another thing that you could do, if you're like, really, you're still talking about, tens of thousands of dollars. You can take small steps. When you do need to replace appliance, certainly pay attention to the Energy Star label. That's a federal program where they do, pardon me, extensive testing on those appliances to make sure that they have a reduced energy consumption. So not only are you going to be reducing electricity usage, it saves you money when you buy appliances that are Energy Star labeled because you're paying less to, the man for those utilities. You also, your utility provider, like including, pardon me, Tri-County Co-op, will have rebates for certain programs. Like Tri-County Co-op has a rebate program for water heaters. If you buy a water heater that is, has a certain energy rating, and you save your receipt and send in the paperwork, they'll send you a check for $75. They do the same thing when you buy light bulbs. If you buy LED bulbs to replace your compact fluorescents or to replace incandescent bulbs, save the receipts, and then they will take money off of, I think it's 50 cents for each bulb, but they'll take money off of your utility bill. So it's just a little bit of paperwork to keep up with. Another thing that you can do, small step, doesn't cost any money, is changing your behavior. And you've all heard this, that if you adjust your thermostat in the winter, if you turn it down 1 degree, and in the summer months turn it up 1 degree, that's just 1 degree. You may not even notice a difference. And then maybe a year later, change it another degree, slowly but surely, and it's saving you money too. So that's a small change I think that we can each take into account with our daily lives. And then also, some of you may notice as I leave the building every day and I'm walking down the halls, I'll peek in classrooms, make sure there's no one there, and flip off the lights. Because even though our classrooms have sensors, some of them have sensors that are supposed to turn the lights off, it doesn't always work. So flip the lights off. It's a common misconception that with fluorescent bulbs you should leave them on because it uses less energy than if you flip them off and then back on. That is a complete misconception. If it's just for a few seconds, yes, but if it's for more than 5 minutes, then it's absolutely more efficient to turn those off. And then speaking of common misconceptions, vehicle idling is a big problem. I sit in a car line sometimes to pick up my kiddos at school, and it can be the most beautiful day, and people will sit there for 30, 45 minutes with their vehicle running. And just to maintain an appropriate temperature in their car, but that's in front of schools where those potential pollutants are around our kiddos, and it's also costing you gasoline because it's using that gas. There is a significant cost associated with idling. With a typical sedan, it uses about half a gallon per hour. So you're like, half a gallon of gas, but that's half a gallon of gasoline. That clearly the cost is going up and up. And even with diesel vehicles, that's a common misconception that I have to let it warm up for 5 minutes or more and leave it running, so we don't have a cold start, and that's more difficult on the engine, or it won't start. But that's again a misconception because vehicles have changed. Those engines are much, much more updated. And for a diesel vehicle, yes, if it's very cold outside, it's still recommended that you let it run for about 3 minutes, but prolonged idling is something that we can all change. When you're sitting in a drive-through and you're picking up food, if it's going to be any more than 10 seconds, then certainly shut that off. Other than, safety issues, like when you're sitting at a traffic light, if you're like, it's gonna be more than 10 seconds, I'll turn it off, and then back on. You may worry about some safety concerns, but certainly take that into consideration if it's anything that's much more reasonable than that as far as the time period goes. Small behavior that can save you money. There's even a whole category of people that are called hypermilers that try and do like every little thing, like they'll just won't even come to a full stop, they'll kind of roll through, or not that you have to go to that extreme, but when you're parking somewhere, instead of pulling into a spot where you have to back out, do pull-through parking. It's not only safer because it prevents you from having to back out, but if there's an area where you can pull through, you'll save tiny little bits of fuel every single time. So those are just some small things, limited on time for our talk, so we can't go into everything, but certainly ask any questions if you have about energy resources. Recycling is kind of a sore subject for Parker County. The city has a fantastic recycling program. If you live in the city limits of Weatherford, they have a program that only costs $2.50 per month. That's incredibly cheap. They pick it up every week, and it's a really large cart. And there is a one-time cart fee of $10, just so they can have the assurance that you're not going to damage that cart. But please, I encourage you, if you live in the city limits, or if you have a small business in the city limits, it's not just for residential areas anymore, because Weatherford College was able to partner with the city. About 3 years ago, I had gotten frustrated with various groups had tried to do recycling on campus. Nancy McVeigh and I think Leela Morris at various times had started recycling with students, and it goes great, but then we have a student population that changes quite often, so it's hard to keep up with that. And it's been over the summer months or breaks. So I said, you know what, the city has this recycling program. Do you think they'd be interested in partnering with the college? And they were like, yeah, we drive right past there all the time. We'll be happy to partner with you. So on campus, we have 8 of those roll-away carts. And to my knowledge, they're not even charging us. They're just happy to have that partnership. So consider that if that's something that you're a part of. And if you're on campus, please save me from having to dig through the trash cans and walking stuff down to the recycling bin, because I do. If I'll see an empty water bottle in there or a can, I'll walk them down to the recycling bin, because they're not everywhere, and for many of us, it's the path of least resistance. A trash can is closer, so I'm just going to toss it in there. But take a little extra time and take that to one of our recycling carts. The things that you can recycle, they take pretty much anything, all plastics, although some of those plastics that go in there, if you put styrofoam in there, they end up pulling those out and that goes to the landfill. They accept it, but then that's just creating more work on the far end because they technically don't recycle that styrofoam. Other things that you should not put in there, plastic films like those grocery bags, plastic grocery bags shouldn't go in there because it clogs up the machinery. But in just a second, I'll talk about what you can do with those. If you live outside the city limits, this is the very frustrating part. The county precinct barns in Parker County used to have wonderful roll-away dumpsters where you could take all of your recyclables, but about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, it became cost prohibitive for them because they were having to take all of that recycling to Fort Worth to what we call a materials recovery facility, the recycling station, where they sort it, and they make money off of that. But it got to the point where the city was having to pay more, the county was paying more than what they could make. And so they said, we're just going to stop. The county commissioners court decided that without a lot of public feedback. They still accept a few items, but therein lies the frustration for those of us that live outside of the city limits. I personally, because I busted my rear end to get the recycling program going on the college, I still bring my recycling up to the college. But I make sure that the bins are not overflowing. We did have an issue sometimes with people bringing stuff up here and just setting it next to the cart. That does come with the cost because we have facility services that's having to bend over backwards to take that to the curb for us. So if you do that, if you bring your recycling here, please make sure you do so with discretion. Just make sure you're not piling it up and overflowing it. But long-term solution, the city of Weatherford received a grant very recently from North Central Texas Council on Governments where they're doing a study, right now it's just in the research phase, where they're looking at getting a MRF, it's fun to say, one of those materials recovery facilities in Parker County. So they've asked me to work with them, and they're working with the hospital and other local schools, the school districts, to do a study of just what kind of recycling is already going on, could we get this in Parker County? And then that would make it more cost effective for us to be able to hopefully resume countywide recycling again. So again, it's going to vary depending upon where you live, if you're outside of Parker County. But there are options, you just usually have to work a little bit harder. But isn't it worth it, right? It's worth it, like in class. You realize, after the first exam you didn't do too well, you're like, oh, I'm gonna have to work a little harder. But it's worth it when you get the grade that you've really earned. So all of this is worth it in the long run. It can be a personal goal, and then when we all do it, that's like my modus operandi. That's kind of how I work. That's why I chose teaching and not politics, for many other reasons too. With politics, you feel like I can make such a big difference, but I feel like every semester that I teach students about small stuff like this, then you go on and teach one other person, and then another person, and I've been doing that for 11 years here now. So you can all go out and spread that message too, and the little steps can really add up. We do have at the college in our parking lot, and there's one at Wright Elementary, and there's probably several more around town. It's just that on their website, the bin locator was not working. But those paper retriever big dumpsters, they're green and yellow. You can take newspaper, regular paper, they just don't take cardboard, but those are available, and that's a fundraiser for those schools. But how about when you shop? You may think, ooh, paper bags when I go shopping, because then that's recyclable. Yes, paper bags are recyclable, and most of them are made from already recycled materials, but which one should you choose, paper or plastic?
Reusable?
That's right, it was a trick question. It was a trick question because you should choose a reusable shopping bag. That's another little small step that you can take. Just get in the habit every time you hop out of the car to go in the store, then choose a reusable bag. And Weatherford College in the past has had a little promotional, item where it was one of those shopping bags, and various other, banks will do that. You can get them for free from a lot of different places. Maybe we could do that again as another promotional item coming up in the future. But you can get free ones, or they're just $1 each. Or the next time you give a gift to someone, instead of, buying a paper cutesy bag, wrap it in a reusable shopping bag, and then you're giving 2 gifts at once because you've given them something that they can shop with on a shopping trip. Other recycling options, whenever you do, if you did use a plastic grocery bag, you can reuse those in your home, or I use them for picking up dog poop in the backyard. You can also take them to your local grocery store or Walmart or Target. They have bins at the front of the store where they recycle those at a different facility. Battery recycling can be done, not only rechargeable batteries, because those don't last forever, but also lead acid batteries. You should absolutely take them to a facility to recycle because they are very toxic. They contain, you can see lead, in this one right here. If we dump those in a landfill, then eventually, number one, those landfills are filling up, but number two, it has the potential to leach into our environment and come back and bite us in the butt. If you have large electronics, the city will come pick those up for a fee of $15. But smaller things like cell phones or tablets, those can be taken to places like Best Buy or other areas. And then there's a website, Earth 911. You can enter in your zip code if you want to know, and you can list what kind of recycling you want to do. Maybe it's paint, or maybe it's a car battery. And it will tell you, it's a very up-to-date list of specific recycling resources in your area. So it's a great website. Another thing that you could think about, big steps and small steps alike, is water. Water is something that this year we've had in abundance. We've had plenty of rainfall in the fall and in this winter, but in previous years that it's not always guaranteed, obviously. And we see more and more fluctuations as we go along. So one of the things that we can do is we can capture that rainwater. And this is, again, another picture from my house. You can't make it out very well with the lights, but this is a 65-gallon rain barrel that I have a couple of those. And then I attached this little thing called a rain reserve to my gutter. I just kind of spliced out a little piece of my gutter. And this rain reserve will catch any leaves or debris that came off the roof and sends water over into the barrel. But then, let's say the barrel fills up. It fills up. If it's a good rain, it'll fill up in about 30 minutes. It'll divert the rest of that just back down to the gutter so the barrel's not overflowing. And then you can use that water to water. It's not for drinking. You could treat it and use it for drinking water, but that's an extra step. But I use it to water all of my plants. And if you have a small garden area or even your flower beds, shifting to drip irrigation targets the water to that particular plant, so you're not overwatering. And if you do choose to water your lawn or to water garden plants or house plants, pick the time of day that you're watering, because there is a significant amount of that water that's lost to evaporation if you do it during the middle of the day. It frustrates me to no end if you're driving around town and you see sprinklers going off in the middle of the afternoon. About 80% of that can be lost to evaporation. And if it's windy, then the water may be blowing off onto sidewalks, your car, and you know, institutions around here are also very guilty of that same thing, because we have this kind of mantra bred into us that we need green grass. We got to keep up with the neighbors, got to look good for our neighbors. We need that green, leafy, squishy grass. But that part of that is just a societal norm, kind of like society told us it was nice to have this, you know, nice healthy glow with a suntan, right? Clearly we know that that leads to, that's UV exposure, can lead to increased risk of skin cancer and other things. We've got to get past that societal norm and thinking that we have to keep up with that and make informed decisions. So we don't need to have a green leafy lawn. I mean, if it's a little bit moist, yes, it can keep your house from settling and having any cracking. It does cool off your home to have more shade from plants, but that's just a small behavioral thing that more people could become more conscious and aware of. And it doesn't mean we have to shift to, you know, lava rocks and cactus in our front yards. It doesn't have to be that dramatic. There are a lot of things that use very low water, native plants that we could adopt very easily. And what about lawn care? Let's say you do want that green leafy lawn, but you don't want to spend as much money, you don't want to do something that's potentially hazardous for you, your family, your pets that are running in and out of the house and back into the yard. So there are different fertilizers and pesticides that you could use that have a smaller ecological footprint. Whenever you fertilize your lawn, I use things like granular molasses. It's just a big bag of dried out molasses flakes. And cornmeal. Cornmeal, just like the cornmeal that you use to make muffins, is a very good nutrient for your plants. And it doesn't fertilize your plants as rapidly as something like Miracle-Gro. It takes a while for it to work, but it works for a longer period of time. And boy, does your yard smell great. It smells like you've been baking outside whenever you have some molasses in your yard. Now, the chicken manure doesn't smell so hot, but there are some blends that have like a little bit of chicken manure, a little bit of alfalfa, some various things that have been blended into that. Pesticides, you know, that's a big one where we don't want pests, like especially fire ants in our yard, just for the safety issue and the pain. But I've found a solution that works really well for me. It's something called Mound Drench, and it's a liquid. And you can buy all of these around here. Like all of our farm and ranch places have this. And even at Lowe's and Home Depot, they're carrying most of these. This Mound Drench is made out of liquid molasses, orange oil, and compost tea. It's the liquid that comes off of compost, and it's really acidic. And you pour it slowly, you mix it with water and pour it over the fire ants, and they just come streaming out of the fire ant mound, and it's almost like I can hear them screaming, like, ah, run for your life. But it does a really good job at wiping out those fire ants. And then you could also, if you have a fungal infection in your yard, most people, like if a grass gets a fungus, and it can, most people might think, oh, I need a fungicide. Well, when you get a fungicide or fungicide, whichever, either one is appropriate, you're not only killing the bad fungus, you're killing the good fungus as well that helps your lawn thrive. It's kind of like when you take antibiotics for a respiratory tract infection, and then you get a yeast infection later on because you wiped out some of your good bacteria, or you have some intestinal distress because of that. The good fungi are equally healthy for our lawns. So do something a little bit more gentle, like they have a blend that's cornmeal plus garlic inside of it. So again, it smells like you've been cooking some Italian food in your yard. That garlic has some natural antimicrobial properties. And all of these are relatively inexpensive. They're big old heavy bags, you know, like a 40-pound bag, but you can get your weightlifting in as you're taking care of your lawn. Some other gardening things that you can do, we have an abundance of groups in our area, such as our Parker County Master Gardeners and the Native Plant Society. We have a Cross Timbers chapter that are very active, and they all love to do service projects. If you ask them, hey, I have this project that I'm working on, they're like, can I help, can I help? They love to come help do this. They will plan out what you should plant or what you could plant whatever you're interested in. So hit up these groups or become a member if you're interested, because they have an abundance of resources and all the time in the world to often help. The Parker County Master Gardeners, they have a kind of some gardens that are being shown off up at the Agricultural Extension Office on North Main, and then that's also where their offices are housed, so you can always hit them up for advice. Unfortunately, Weatherford has fewer and fewer kind of family-operated nurseries. Weatherford Gardens closed down a few years ago, and I mentioned Lowe's and Home Depot and those bigger box stores have eco-friendly options. They're everywhere, but a local nursery on Fort Worth Highway, Stewart Nursery, has a wide selection of native plants, and they will also do free landscaping advice. They will make up a plan for you. They've even done a free plan for Weatherford College for what we could potentially implement in our landscaping. And then compost. I mentioned that earlier. I mentioned the compost tea. This is another source of great fertilizer for your garden or your lawn. And it also reduces how much trash you make. It's just a small step that you could take. This is my compost bucket. This is just a little 1-gallon bucket that I keep out on my countertop. And it's made out of stainless steel, and then it has a little carbon filter up at the top, because decaying plants and vegetable matter get a little stinky. I put my coffee grounds in there and even the whole coffee filter in there. But it does get a little smelly. That's the decomposition process. But then about just once a week, I'll go take that outside, and this is my compost bin in my garden. It's just it's in the dead of winter, so that's why my garden is rather bare, but it's just made out of some wood with some spaces in between the slats to allow critters to go in and out, because critters, they love to eat this stuff. And we're not talking big stuff like raccoons, I don't want those in there, but we're talking little things like insects, bacteria, fungi will help to break that down. And then eventually at the bottom of that, we get this thick, crumbly black stuff that they call black gold. And then I scoop that out and sprinkle it on my garden, and it leads to very, very healthy plants. It's a type of fertilizer that lasts for a long period of time. So maybe a small step that you could take. And there's even a couple individuals on campus, they know that I compost, and they live in an apartment, and they can't compost, or they don't have a place to take their compost. So they still collect all their scraps and then just bring them to me, and I go dump them at my house. So it doesn't take anything fancy. You could even just start a pile of leaves, dead leaves in your backyard, dump your scraps there, and then turn it over every once in a while and have an easy compost kind of bin for yourself. Other things that you could do, maybe you don't want to have a little garden and grow some fruits and veggies. Sometimes it's hard because we have a lot of clay in our soils, but maybe you want to help support some more local organizations and get local produce. There are what we call community supported agriculture groups, or CSAs, throughout Parker County. There are many of them in Fort Worth and Tarrant County, and fewer out this way, but there are some. So here's just a list of various places that you could look up. Some of them focus on, they just produce honey or some seasonal things or pecans. Some of them have things like eggs and meat, and you can buy shares of their produce or a side of beef or eggs every once in a while, and you're supporting that local business and getting something that's locally grown and produced. And our farmers market in Weatherford, right in the middle of town, does have some local produce, but you have to be a little bit cautious. And even with some of these, they'll fill up a big basket with some local stuff, but then other things are just the same type of, like if it has apples and strawberries and blueberries in it, those weren't grown around here. Most of those were still shipped here. Most of our produce that we find in the grocery store travels on average about 1,500 miles before it gets to our grocery store. That comes with a big economic toll. That's a lot of fossil fuels, that's more vehicles on the roadway. We know we love to shop local for other things, right? So let's do the same for some of our fruits and vegetables. And sometimes I realize that may be cost prohibitive, but you can share it. You can, go in with a couple of friends to buy one of those shares of beef or the veggies or whatever it may be. Household products. This could go on and on. I didn't want to get into nitty-gritty about different brands because there's an abundance of them. My environmental science class went on a scavenger hunt at Walmart just a month or so ago. And we went to look for, and they thought originally, like when we're going to Walmart, oh, she must be a Walmart hater, right? But we went to Walmart to see that regardless of where you go, you can find eco-friendly products. You just have to be a little bit more of a conscious consumer. So just some small steps that you might be able to take, also looking at different products. Instead of using paper towels for cleaning windows, I'm running out of time. Instead of using paper towels, use reusable cloths. You're gonna use them again and again for years and years to come. Or use your old dish towels that got a little ratty and you don't wanna have them hanging out anymore. Use those for your cleaning towels. Come on in. Beauty products, you can do the same. Instead of using those little disposable makeup removal cloths, you can buy some reusable cloths. Or you can even use old t-shirts for this. You know, you got some t-shirts that were kind of yellowed or stained, cut them up into little squares or rectangles, and you can use those for makeup removal, and they're really good at exfoliating too, right? Because they've got a little bit of texture to them. Whenever you're storing foods or beverages, a lot of us, you know, we're doing some great steps to use a reusable container. And we also, you may have noticed in this building and also in the gym, we have a water bottle refill station that we worked really hard to get. My environmental science students did that a couple years ago. But when you get a reusable container, you're saving money because how much does a bottle of water cost? Like $1.50, $2? Too much, right? When it costs just fractions of a cent to be able to fill it up. And it's healthier for you because even those plastics, you know, when they say, ooh, it's BPA free, and you're like, what's BPA? It must be bad. Yes, bisphenol A has been identified as a possible endocrine disruptor. You don't want to hear that. But guess what they switched it out with? Like, you're like, yay, it doesn't have BPA anymore. Well, they switched to something called BPS, bisphenol S. It's a very closely related product that just hasn't been studied as extensively, so it didn't have a bad rap sheet just yet. So we should still kind of steer away from those products, and especially if you're going to be microwaving them. Even if you store something in plastic, please, please, please don't microwave it in the plastic because that releases some of those chemicals into your food and then you're eating it. So instead, opt for glass containers or stainless steel. Like in my kiddos' lunches, I'm like, I'm not going to send them with glass to school. But I have some little stainless steel containers with little silicone lids that they can utilize. And they last for a much longer period of time than the plastic does. And then little plastic baggies. I do wash my Ziploc bags if I use some. I reuse them. I know I'm that person. But I also have some reusable cloth ones that I'll, stuff, like chips or goldfish in for snacks. And then use those for packing lunches and for me. And then even when you're going to the grocery store, maybe you've made that step to use the reusable bag, but also produce bags. Instead of those plastic produce bags, there's all kinds of, you can buy them on Amazon or even in your local retailer, you can buy reusable cloth bags to put produce in. And then when it comes to bulbs, I've kind of already mentioned the LEDs and CFLs earlier, but now it's harder and harder to find CFLs, those are the compact fluorescent lamps, because they're made with mercury. And mercury, whenever we dispose of that, is a very hazardous substance. It's a very potent neurotoxin. So, and it doesn't last as long. LEDs used to be very prohibitively expensive, but the price, with more consumer demand, as with a lot of things, the price goes down. So now LED bulbs, they are far more easily available. So certainly make the shift. Not necessarily that you have to go out and remove every single bulb, but when a bulb burns out, make that choice to purchase an LED bulb instead. And then consumption. The big part of this is just to think before you buy. Make a conscious decision. Be more conscious of it because every time you buy a product, it's like a vote. It's like saying, yes, I like your product. If you don't buy that product, is that company going to keep making as much of it? It's not. And if you buy more of the product, the company says, consumers are demanding it, we should make more, and we're going to bring the price down. So consciously make a decision when you're buying things, whether it's at the grocery store or you see that cute shirt at Target. Do I really need that? Maybe I'll save some money, and maybe I'll just wait until I need to replace something else. So practice what we call eco-labeling, or pay attention to eco-labels. Eco-labeling is where companies want you to know, hey, this product is truly eco-friendly, like that Energy Star label. But be very wary of greenwashing. Greenwashing is where companies will say, ooh, this is all natural. What does that even mean? Is there any, standardization to what the word natural means? There is not. So all natural could have something that contains mercury or arsenic. Those are natural products, right? But we certainly doesn't mean that we want them. So a small thing, even if it's just one thing that you take away from this, Instead of picking up takeout, go in the restaurant and eat. And it's gonna save those containers that you're just gonna toss in the trash anyways. Or let's say you do decide to take your food home, ask for no straws and no plastic utensils and all of those toys for your kiddos. You can say, hey, I don't need any of the toys today. Except for Chick-fil-A, they have cool kid toys for their meals. But otherwise, you can say, no, I don't need those toys, thank you. Because that little step and then somebody hears me and they're like, crazy woman. But then they're like, huh, maybe I don't need those either. So that little step can add up slowly but surely. And I just want to leave you with the last couple of thoughts. This was a spread that was done for National Geographic where they asked a family in India to bring all of their possessions from their home outside and put them on display for this photo shoot. So you can see, a family bed, their cooking utensils, their food, dry goods, and a couple of, personal or religious items, very minimalistic, right? Imagine your own house or even your apartment. If National Geographic came along and said, bring all of your stuff outside, we want to use you for a photo shoot. Can you think about it? Starting to sweat a little thinking about it. This is what just the average American family utilizes. This was also done for that same photo shoot. Can you even see the family in there? They're here in the front. It's a little family of 4. And before we go shaming them like, oh my gosh, that's so much stuff, it's probably no different than the majority of our homes, right? They've just got a washer and a dryer, refrigerator, stove, a bike for each child, a car for each eligible driver, and their indoor play equipment, outdoor play equipment, a bed for each family member. And I'm not trying to say that we have to just radically change everything. Maybe you want to, maybe you want to shake it up a little bit, but just take one little thing. I think if there's any entrepreneurs in the room, if you could make an app, and maybe one already exists, where you just have like some kind of incentive program for what's one small step I can do today. There's all kinds of diet apps like that, right? Like, do this one thing today. Well, if we did that for what's one small step that you could do today, like turn the lights off, or don't flush the toilet. If it's yellow, let it mellow. If it's brown, flush it down. I practice that in my house, except when we have company. I try and remind my children and my husband. But little tiny steps may add up. Saves you money, and it may save those resources, because ultimately I feel like that's our responsibility. All right? Thank you guys so much.